This is asking if structural dissociation, which is what my other video was on, is basically saying that people with cptsd can have something akin to alters. I guess in a nutshell, I would say mostly no, but kind of yes. Please keep in mind, I'm not a therapist or other professional. I'm just a nerd who is reading a textbook on structural dissociation that is intended for therapists. But structural dissociation theory sees structural dissociation on a spectrum. And so the milder end, primary structural dissociation, exists in simple PTSD. And that is usually people who had pretty solid childhoods and then experienced one traumatic event, as opposed to a series of traumatic events like childhood neglect or childhood abuse. And with simple PTSD, you still have structural dissociation, but it's that you only have two parts. You have an apparently normal part and one EP. With cptsd, you have multiple traumas, and so you have one ANP and multiple EPs. I believe that borderline personality disorder, BPD, is also in that category of one ANP and multiple EPs. Then there are other types of structural dissociation disorders that have multiple ANPs and multiple EPs. And that's where you get things like D.I.d. and things like alters. That is not the case with primary and secondary structural dissociation or things like cptsd or PTSD. But there is still parts. I think it's easy for this to sound really intense, and I think it's probably less extreme sounding than what you might be imagining. If you yourself or somebody close to you has ever noticed a real strong shift in the way that you perceive someone or something following a trigger, that's likely structural dissociation. For example, maybe you dated somebody and they thought that you were just the bee's knees and they told you how wonderful you were, and even within the course of one day, in the morning, they're telling you how amazing you make them feel and how loved you make them feel. Then something happens that triggers them later that day. Maybe you're supposed to meet at a restaurant for dinner and you show up late, and so something about you showing up late makes them so triggered that they get into this part where suddenly they are feeling like you don't even love them, you don't put any energy into the relationship, you are selfish, you are just taking advantage of them, and maybe they continue to feel that way and are highly emotional for an hour or a few hours or the rest of the night. But then you kind of get through it, and then for weeks or months they are back in this phase of not seeing you that way. But then some other future time you are late to something again, and again they come back into this headspace of thinking that you have never really cared about them and that you are going to end up abandoning them or something like that. That's a sign of structural dissociation. They are experiencing such big emotions and triggers and beliefs that kind of stay in a cluster that are separate from the way that they typically function, the way they typically think, feel, believe. But it also can be even milder than that. It can be something like maybe most of the time you think you are pretty capable and competent, and that you have faith in yourself that when difficult things come your way, you'll find a way to get through it. But then every once in a while, something happens that triggers something in you, and suddenly you feel like you are never going to succeed in life, that you have always been stupid. Maybe even you recognize that most of the time I don't think I'm stupid, but right now you feel so stupid that you're convinced that the rest of the time when you do think that you're a competent person, that version of you is crazy. When there's like contradictions in how you think, feel, and operate when you are triggered versus how you're not triggered, it's a sign that those two like parts of you aren't in communication, so they're structurally dissociated. At least this is my understanding of this. Again, I'm not an expert, so if there's therapists or other professionals who happen to see this and I said anything incorrectly, absolutely please correct me.